Jack Coulson returned from the store to find his flagpole severed, his American flag crumpled like trash on the porch. The HOA had ripped it from the ground, without warning. He picked up the flag with shaking hands, but his silence held more power than rage. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jack Coulson's mornings had always begun the same way, one hand on his cane, the other gripping the halyard, eyes squinting into the pale gold of dawn as he raised the flag with the care of a man laying a friend to rest. The soft clink of the pulley, the rising fabric catching the morning light. It was ritual, not routine. At 73, the ritual meant more now than it ever had. The flag was the only thing left that hadn't faded with time, with loss. His wife had passed 6 winters ago. His daughter had married and moved across the country. But the flag, and the men it represented, stayed with him every day. The flagpole itself wasn't grand, just a 10-foot aluminum shaft Jack had cemented into the earth years ago with his own hands, a shovel, and an aching knee. It leaned ever so slightly westward, like it, too, had weathered storms. Jack repainted it every 4th of July. The base was chipped, sure, but steady, reliable, just like the men whose names he still carried in the breast pocket of his old uniform. That all changed the day the letter arrived. HOA official violation notice. His name printed in bold. The offense: unauthorized flagpole exceeding HOA height restrictions. $250 fine, due in 10 days. At first, Jack thought it was a mistake. Maybe a new hire misread the bylaws. Maybe someone had confused his home with the neighbors. But then came the second notice. Then a third. And when he called the number on the letter, a clipped voice belonging to a man named Mark Delaney informed him that the new HOA board was strictly enforcing aesthetics. Aesthetics, Jack muttered under his breath that night, staring at the folded flags on his mantel, one from his father's casket, one from his own retirement. What part of those looked out of place? He didn't argue, didn't write angry letters or attend the monthly meetings where the board discussed grass length and mailbox paint codes. He just kept raising his flag each morning, a little slower now, jaw set, a little harder. And then, one afternoon, he came back from picking up milk and a newspaper to find the pole gone. Severed clean at the base. The flag, dirt-streaked, hastily folded, sat like an accusation on his front steps. The world spun in a slow, aching circle as Jack stared at the absence. His breath trembled, but he didn't let it turn into words. He just dropped to one knee, the bad one, and gathered the flag as if lifting a fallen comrade, pressed it tight to his chest and shut his eyes. In that quiet, that deep, offended quiet, something settled inside him. This wasn't just about a flag anymore. It was about memory, about dignity, about the one promise he had left to keep. And Jack Coulson didn't break promises. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops of Oak Ridge Estates when the rumble of an engine rolled down the street like thunder in a place long used to whispers. Jack stood at the edge of his lawn, cane planted firm, as the matte black truck eased to a stop in front of his house. The door opened, and out stepped Danny Scraps Moretti, tough as gravel, lean as wire, and just as likely to cut through nonsense. His jeans were grease-stained, his boots dusty, and his bomber jacket looked like it still remembered the roar of hangars and the smell of aviation fuel. Danny didn't need to ask questions. He looked at the spot where the old flagpole had been, the soil still fresh, the scar in the earth still raw. Then he looked at Jack, reached out a hand, and gave a firm nod. "Where are we building it?" he said, voice like sandpaper. Jack exhaled. Not relief, resolve. The morning passed in sparks and shovels. Danny pulled open the bed of his truck, revealing toolboxes, steel braces, a level, a rolled-up blueprint tube with grease fingerprints and coffee stains. It wasn't just tools he brought. It was intent. By mid-afternoon, another truck pulled in, then another, then 3 more. No invitations had gone out, no emails, just calls, and word spread. They came in worn flannel and flight jackets, bearing tool belts, steel-toe boots, thermoses of black coffee. Some walked slow with canes. Some wore prosthetics. One leaned on a German Shepherd service dog. But their eyes were sharp, focused. They didn't need to talk much. They already knew what this was. Riley Tate, 67, former civil engineer, arrived with a rolled-out set of structural diagrams. Wind resistance, concrete depth, solar-powered lights. If they want specs, we'll give them the Gettysburg Address, printed in steel. He winked. Jack smiled for the first time in days. The HOA's letter came around 4 p.m., typed, cold, full of legalese. Immediate cessation of unapproved construction. Jack read it once, then tacked it to the side of his tool shed with a nail and his hammer. The sun dipped low as steel segments were welded and concrete poured. A local teenager on a bike stopped to film it on his phone. It's like a bunch of old-school Avengers, but with socket wrenches. The pole rose in sections, straight as judgment. 40 feet of stainless steel, locked into place with care that bordered on reverence. At its base, they bolted on a black plaque, etched in clean lettering, in memory of those who never came home. That night, as dusk settled and crickets began their low chorus, headlights swept across the lawn. A white SUV. Mark Delaney stepped out, pressed shirt, clipboard under one arm, 2 security guards flanking him. He handed Jack a folded cease and desist. "You can't do this," he said flatly. Jack didn't blink. Behind him, 24 veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, weathered, silent, watching. Danny struck a match and lit a cigar, letting the smoke drift upward. Jack looked Mark in the eye. "You're welcome to try taking it down," he said, voice low and even. "But I wouldn't advise it." The guards shifted, looked at the crew, men who had flown into fire, patched wounds mid-air, buried brothers with their own hands. None of them moved. Mark hesitated, folded the notice again, and walked away. No words, no power, just the soft crunch of his shoes fading down the driveway. At 0600 sharp, Jack Coulson stepped out onto his porch, spine straight, breath steady, and the weight of 73 years stitched neatly into the creases of his dress blues. The silver trim of his cap caught the first light of morning, casting a soft gleam across his brow. He moved slowly, not from pain but from purpose, as he unfolded the flag with the practiced hands of a man who had done this under combat skies, on dirt runways, and now in the front yard of a quiet American suburb. The flag felt heavier than usual, not in weight, but in meaning. The cloth held the memory of sacrifice, the echo of names too long gone, and the simple, unshakable defiance of dignity. With each inch the stars and stripes climbed skyward, a hush settled over the street like reverence wrapping the air itself. At the peak of the pole, the brass began. The bugle's first notes pierced the silence, clear and mournful. Not a recording, not a gimmick. A real man, an old friend, stood by the garden with his horn, uniformed and steady, the sound of taps weaving through leaves and morning mist like prayer. The crowd that had gathered, quietly, respectfully, stood motionless. Veterans stood at attention. Parents pressed hands to children's backs. The kids mirrored them, tiny palms flat against small hearts. Jack didn't turn from the flag. He saluted, eyes shining but unbroken. A reporter leaned in through the stillness, her voice gentle. "Mr. Coulson, why go through all of this?" Jack kept his gaze fixed upward. The flag swayed gently in a wind that seemed to come at just the right time. "I buried 23 men under that banner," he said. "You think a fine was going to stop me?" That line became the headline. Within hours, it was on screens across the country. The footage, Jack raising the flag, the trumpet call, the quiet resolve, spread like fire through dry brush. By nightfall, anchors were calling it a modern stand for honor. Donations poured in, comments flooded with thanks. Even a U.S. senator shared the story with 3 words: "Let it fly." Under pressure, the HOA folded. Fines withdrawn, policy rewritten. But Jack didn't brag. That Sunday, he cooked ribs on a rusty grill and passed plates of potato salad to strangers who'd become brothers. The lawn that had once been the site of a silent battle now bloomed with voices, laughter, and the stomp of children's feet chasing each other through open grass. Across the street, Mark Delaney stood at his window. He watched in silence as the flag caught an afternoon gust and lifted higher still. A boy, no more than 8, wandered up to the plaque at the pole's base. He looked up at Jack. "Can I touch it?" Jack bent down, eye level. "Only if you read it first." The boy traced each word with his finger, then straightened his back and saluted. Not because anyone told him to, but because now he understood. The air had cooled with the easing of summer, the kind of late evening quiet where even the crickets seemed to wait their turn. Jack sat on the porch, boots flat on the worn boards, a glass of sweet tea resting on the table beside him. The flag above him caught the breeze with a slow, steady rustle, less a sound than a presence. The pole rose behind the house like a sentinel, gleaming in the final amber stretch of daylight. Beside him sat Danny and Riley, old friends bound not just by war, but by something harder to name. The shared weight of memory and the relief of having done something that mattered. Jack didn't talk much these days, not unless he had something worth saying. The world had said enough for him. The news stories had run their course. The interviews dried up after he turned down the VA's request to make him a national face of patriotism. This wasn't about headlines, he'd told them. It was about being able to sleep at night. Each morning, he still rose with the sun, still walked with that limp across dew-soaked grass, flag in hand, still raised it like it was a prayer he refused to stop saying. And every Sunday, just after supper, taps still played. Sometimes through brass, sometimes through an old Bluetooth speaker, but always with reverence. That evening, as light faded into dusk, a woman stepped onto the edge of his lawn. Mid-50s, neat gray cardigan, trembling lips. She approached with hesitation, clutching something close to her chest, a photograph, perhaps, or a folded letter. "My father served with you," she said softly. "Flight 419. He never made it back." Jack stood slowly, the porch groaning beneath his weight. He removed his cap. His eyes didn't flinch, but they filled. "He was one of the good ones," Jack said. "One of the best." She nodded. "I think he'd be proud." He pulled a chair beside him. "Sit a while." They talked long after the street lamps flickered on. The flagpole above them caught what little moonlight there was, throwing down a sliver of reflection like a quiet sword planted in soil. Someone, maybe Danny, maybe Riley, asked Jack what it all meant in the end. Everything they'd fought for, pushed against, stood tall through. Jack didn't pause. "Sometimes," he said, "the tallest thing on your property isn't the pole. It's the principle behind it." And in Oak Ridge Estates, where pages of rules once outweighed acts of honor, something had changed. Not in the documents, not in the meetings, but in the hearts of the people who now looked up when they passed Jack's yard. And when a kid asked, "Why's that flagpole so tall?" Someone always answered, "It's standing for those who can't."